Hello, welcome to the eDiscovery channel. This is Tom O'Connor from actually fairly frigid New Orleans this morning, as apparently a big storm is moving across the country, and we, as always, get the southern end of that, which for us, frigid means it's like 52 degrees out. We are going to do a little presentation here this morning, as you can see on your screen, called Navigating the Dichotomy of Data. And I've got as our guest, special mystery guest. He's declined the video interface, our old friend Hunter McMahon. And Hunter has got an impressive title, the Director of Data Analytics at IDS. IDS, for many of you probably know, is a company owned and run by our old friend Dan Regard, an expatriated Cajun who's now also in Washington, D.C. But Dan's well known in our field, and Hunter probably isn't as well known and should be, and we're hoping that today's recording will help with that. Hunter, how you doing today?
Doing good, thanks, Tom.
Great. You and I worked briefly together for about a week at the old Advanced Discovery, right? You were with Altep, as I recall, and then
I was prior to joining IDS.
Yes, and then Altep was acquired by AD, and then about 2 days later they kicked me to the curb, and I think 2 days after that you left, and now they of course were absorbed by Concilio, and we're on to bigger and brighter things. And in your role as the Director of Data Analytics, we had a kind of a fascinating discussion the other day, a couple of weeks ago now, about what you call the dichotomy of data. And that is, I was grousing about the fact that we're getting all these other data types in eDiscovery now. It's not so much email as the whole IoT world and video recordings and PowerPoints and basically an entire subset of documents which are not our standard data types of text, either in email or even a spreadsheet. And you said that you had something, a new approach to deal with that type of data, and that you can handle it extremely quickly. So I'd like you to explain that to us, because I'm fascinated by it, quite frankly. So take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. So part of the reason I can't do the video is because I pace while I talk, and unfortunately they haven't made the cameras that follow me yet. So with that said, you know, one of the things that we have found to be challenging, or challenging clients, I should say, in the last couple of years particularly, is all the structured data. The data that typically is just thrown over the wall and said, oh, I hope an economist can deal with this, or a statistician. And what we have found is that there is a true benefit to embracing that and actually understanding it, so that we call it the dichotomy of data, right? The difference between context and content. And so as we roll through this, you know, there's a couple of things to keep in mind, is that hopefully after today, you're going to feel challenged to change your mindset a bit. And we'll go through that at the end. But historically, I've actually been challenged. And so part of what I've done from time to time is try to get back in shape. I've used a variety of fitness trackers and different kind of information, and even apps, to make sure that I tried to stay in shape over the years. As a good friend said once, you know, round is a shape. I said, that's not the shape I wanted to be. So, you know, there was a time where I had plans with everything, and I would map everything out. I knew exactly what I was going to do when, and I was in really good shape last time I did the LA Tri, umpteen years ago. And then I even started writing about it. I actually started writing some posts on LinkedIn.
I was like that once too, Hunter, but I was 19 years old and a junior in college and playing sports.
There we go. So I started writing about it, got really into it, even got certified as a Spartan coach. And what I realized at the end of the day was, you know, actions actually speak louder than words. As cliche as that sounds, what I realized was the more I talked about it, I started forgetting about actually training, and I just like to talk about it. And so when I looked back at my data, you know, the training logs and the training miles started going down, and the weight started going up, and you know, my miles per hour, you know, started going down, and all of that kind of information. So it really kind of recently made me step back and look at how that related to what we do on a daily basis. And it really broke down to content and context. That concept of what am I saying that I'm going to be doing, right? What did I say I did today as a workout versus what did I actually do? And with training, we have all the data in the world right now, right? We have the heart rate, we have the steps, all that kind of stuff. And I went for a really hard run today. In reality, the data is telling me something very different. So what I said was very different than what I was actually doing. So let's take for an example here. This is derived from a real world example. And we actually look at a couple of different things, right? We look at an email from Joe and it says, are you able to make the birthday party on Friday? Probably not. What time? Should I send a gift? 3:30, nothing over $75. Don't worry about it. You know, got it. This content right here looks fairly innocuous, right? Tom, you and I are going to go to a birthday party on Friday. That's great. Well, what happens if after this, we noticed that Bob then called Jen. Jen then chatted with Jill. Jill then sent a Facebook message to Don, and a trade happened. And interestingly enough, every time that there are these suspicious trades, this sequence of events happen across different communication channels, across different methods, but the sequence happens. And so the content of these messages, you couldn't see, you couldn't identify what was going on. Once we looked at the sequence of events, who was talking to who, when, now we understood how to look at the content. Turns out at 3:30, you should make a trade not over $75. You could not see that in the email itself. Now, add one more element here. Let's add location. What happens if Bob is in China? Bob has no physical way of making it back to the state for lunch or for the birthday party on Friday.
Right.
All of this is the context around this scenario that you don't get out of reading the email by itself, especially in a large doc review. But the strategies and the techniques that we've developed to be able to say, let's embrace the structured data. Let's focus on the data itself rather than the content first, has given us this capability. So as part of that struggle though, as you go through this.
Hunter, let me ask real quickly there. Well, you displayed typical email messages, but then also text messaging and Facebook messaging. That's the key, right? To establish that context is to go into those newer, less familiar types of messaging systems.
So from a communication ones, that also included call logs. That's certainly an option. But again, some of those we didn't have to, and many times we won't request the content so that we can get the information. We request all the metadata, and then that way we can leverage it to find it and say, okay, we only need the content for these messages. We don't need the content of all messages. We want to know actions, not necessarily the content.
Gotcha.
But when you get it and you get that volume of data, you're going to get a ton of data. And part of the strategy and part of your approach has to be elevating data to information. So now you have context around that information itself, right? Context of context almost. But that just says, okay, red. Red what? Then when you elevate it to information, the light is red. Then it's, okay, the light is red, I should stop my car. The light is red, I should stop my car and not go through the intersection because I might get hit. And it really takes this process. This is a very common acronym, DIKW. Take this approach to information or data and elevating it to information so that you can truly understand what you're looking at. You can't just sit there and it's not a magic button. It's not a, hey, great, I'm going to press a big red button, easy button, and have all this information spit out on the other end. You have to take a diligent approach. And so I often refer to it as, kind of getting a new set of lens, right? A new perspective once you go through this. So if you're sitting here looking at this, it's like, great, I have a really blurry black and white tree. And in reality, what you don't realize until you start breaking it down is that you're looking at a tropical island where I think both of us would rather be sitting right now than at our desk. And so when you start layering on all of this additional data, all of these layers, you actually get a better view. You get a better idea of what's going on. And if you're really good, you even start seeing below the water and you see all the beautiful colors of the coral reef. I mean, this is really the transition that we're seeing from, hey, let's go review a whole bunch of emails to, hey, let's look at all the data around this. Let's look at all of the information, all of the data out there to establish the facts rather than simply relying on somebody's recollection. And we can't exclude their recollection. We can't exclude testimony or the documents themselves, but let's leverage the data. Let's put that first, and then we can actually understand something greater. Because at the end of the day, what we've noticed is when the clients are doing this, they're getting a competitive advantage, whether it's counsel trying to get a new client, or they're trying to get leverage back on a case because, you know, whether it's motions, whether it's discovery requests or whatever, but when they're taking it and they're saying, okay, we're going to control the data. We're going to have a better understanding of our data than opposing is going to, it's giving them this advantage. I'll give you some examples. Everybody loves examples. So we've, you know, as you do this, part of that concept though, is you have to be able to understand how to distill all of this information. So when I talk about the competitive advantage, I talk about, you know, being able to handle 90 billion records, producing almost 900 million records, wherein you have about 8 weeks for analysis that ends up resulting in Class D certification. We've had a lot of different analyses out here. This is one example where, because we control the data, we were able to show individuality more than commonality. Other cases, we're able to show what is going on. So let's take a look at one of those. Not necessarily showing individuality, but here we've got an individual, driver 476, on day 92 of inquiry. And his claim was that he was a service technician, right? So he worked from home, he'd leave home, and he'd go to his route. And today he had 6 assignments. So he went around the city in 6 different assignments and invoiced and said that he worked 10.7 hours. Of course, he got no rest breaks and no meal breaks, right? Of course, it was a very hard day at work. I am now going to ask Dan Regard for overtime because that's my typical day. Here, though, let's look at what really happened. So when we start layering in the data, we get a very different perspective. Turns out that the technician dropped his wife off at work first after clocking in. Okay, goes to his first assignment, goes to his second assignment, goes to his, oh wait, no, he doesn't go to his third. He goes on a little fishing expedition. Nice little pond right there. Then he goes to his third, and before he goes to his fourth, he has lunch. And we know that this is likely a lunch place because he frequents this spot across multiple days. So it's not just a random location. He's actually constantly going there, and it happens to be for about 45 minutes. Goes to his fourth, goes to his fifth location. You know, he's not quite done with the detours for the day, so he's going to go to a park for a little bit. Then he goes to his sixth, and he goes home. Turns out this technician only worked 6.3 hours that day. Substantially different from what he was claiming based off of invoices. And in here, other company information says that he worked 10.7 until we start layering it all together. It was truly the ability to layer all of the structured data together, not simply looking at it individually. That's where the power comes in. The context, right? Interweaving all of that information so that you can understand the entire scenario, as opposed to an individual data stream, as opposed to an individual invoice followed by an individual email or what have you.
So let me ask Hunter, this one in particular, how long would it take to do something like this? I know it's hard to generalize, but you know, give me a guesstimate if you can. What would a project like this take in terms of time, turnaround time?
Well, so let's start from the beginning, right? So let's take a step back and say, where do we start with a project? And the first place we're going to start is talking with the client, and we're going to go through that in a minute through our QDMA process. But okay, it can take anywhere from days to months. It really depends on a couple of things. But let's get there. And so, you know, as you said, it's time for action, right? The whole goal right now is to get people to change their perspective, to change how they're approaching their cases. And we started the theme with, you know, navigation. So we got to go there. And instead of a compass saying northwest, northeast, south, and west, we're going to go with QDMA. something that we reference frequently with clients, which is essentially questions, data, model, and analysis. So here, what we're focused on is the approach. How do you approach these problems? And as we go through, I'll give you some timelines. So the first one are questions. When we're referring to questions, we're saying, what are we trying to ask? What are the legal claims and defenses for a case? What are those legal elements for each one of those? And what are the data-centric elements? So something like identifying and breaking it down. And sometimes this is fairly obvious, and sometimes this is not so obvious. So there's this process. This could be an hour call, or this could be a couple of weeks of trying to break it all down if it's a very complex scenario. Then we go through data. We identify the potential sources. We assess the availability, the accessibility, the potential impact on the analysis, and the cost. And here's where we do a lot of prioritization, because we're not going to go out and simply get 17 sources just because we have 17 sources. We're going to start with the best 3 to 5 sources that will give us the most complete picture and start there. Because the beauty of it is you can always layer in more information and get a richer picture. It's not going to necessarily be bad, but let's start somewhere, right? Like, let's start somewhere and say, what are we seeing within the data? And as we go through this, again, this could be a one-day exercise, or it could be a couple of weeks, just depending on the tempo of the case, right? You can sit down, hunker down, and get this taken care of in a couple of sessions or a couple of conversations. And then you got to actually figure out, what data model are you going to be using? How are you going to make it actionable? How are you going to actually take all of this information and put it in a process that you can actually assess? And so we've developed our data model. Other people have different data models. You know, statisticians and economists all have their analytical data models. We believe in ours, but really this is the process of getting the data in a format that you can layer it together so that you can analyze it all together, because at the end, that's the goal, right? And then you have to define the issues, the objectives. You have to have a plan B, C, D, and E, just in case. You know, and then you want to layer it together and actually verify the data. And you want to use a lot of different data sources to cross-verify and validate what you're seeing in the data. You want to make sure, if it is contradicting testimony, that it is valid, right? That you have a reason that it could be contradicting testimony. But as we look through this is where we spend most of our time now. Historically, you spend a ton of time wrangling the data and dealing with the information and just trying to get it in a format that you can analyze. We've developed the techniques and the technology that makes that a process now, so that we can spend more time here, where we can spend days or months analyzing that data. And we have different capabilities of saying, okay, do we want to find examples of where a driver fails to meet all of those claims and those elements of the claims that we laid out in the first process? Or do we want to assess the entire class? And those are two different vectors of analysis, right? And that just depends on the amount of data and the type of data. We've done it as quick as less than a week, and we've taken as long as months.
Gotcha.
So at the end of the day, though, one of the key phrases that we use is, if you know the data, you can control the narrative better than the other party, and then you can resolve the matter. And we specifically say resolve the matter because it will bring out the truth. You'll know where you have liability, you'll know where you don't, and if you have better control over it, the ball is in your court. You've got that competitive advantage for your client, rather than having to sit there and say, well, I don't know how they came to that conclusion, and trying to undo somebody else's analysis. If you're on the forefront, if you're taking it and actually proactively analyzing the information, it really is powerful. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, really want to ask everybody to commit to change, right? Commit to actually going through and looking at this and taking a different approach to your cases. To sit there and say, I'm going to start with context, not go straight to emails, not go straight to, doc review, massive doc reviews, but I'm going to start with context. I'm going to have a data-centric approach. I'm going to say data is an opportunity for me to have a better control of my matter and understand the facts and the scenarios. And I'm going to follow the data, don't follow the devices. That's a big thing that we're saying lately, is that information may originate or may be accessed from one device or another device, follow the data. Go to the data-centric repositories, look for where the data is the most unique and most powerful for you and your client. Start there, and then move away.
It's interesting you should say that, because it's a point that Craig Ball has made in several presentations we've done recently, that we've got to move away from being document-centric to being data-centric, because it is all about the data. Yeah, that's a great point.
And it's not that we're going to exclude documents, but if the data can help us understand what documents to look at, how powerful is that?
Yeah. Because one of the big problems with large document collections is, proportionality and trying to do some sort of sampling or, some newer form of ECA to cull things down to get our hands around it. I like this approach, because it's saying, don't even think about it in terms of the document. Think about it in terms of the data. I like it. Great.
You got it, sir. So as I've challenged you and everybody else to kind of change your mindset and have a new approach, in 2019, I'm going to get back in shape. I have fallen woefully out of shape. So I've committed to going for the trifecta again for Spartan. I've outlined my race schedule up here. I've already got 4 clients willing to do it with me. So Tom, you're in, right? You're going to do the beast with me? 12 to 14 miles?
Not a chance in the world.
Come on. Are you going to be there to support me at least? It's in Tahoe. It'll be a great time of year.
You might convince me to come out and support you in Tahoe. My wife Gail and I were married in Tahoe. I love Lake Tahoe. We lived in Sacramento I was working on a big case for several years, and we used to go up. She's an avid skier. We go up to Tahoe all the time, and actually got married there. Our son was born in Sacramento, and he also spent a lot of time up there. So that is one of our favorite spots, literally, in the world. So that you might convince me to.
Well, see, there we go. And we can do the next video cast, and I will be on video then. We can do it from there. Until then, I am going to, be enabled by technology and have my data. So I'm going to use my new Garmin that I just got, track it in the app, and Relive is an awesome app out there that allows you to recreate any kind of run routes and actually video it. But up on the bottom of the screen, you can actually follow the public profile of my training data if anybody is interested, because I am truly committed to getting back there, but I'm going to leverage the data to get there. So I'm going to watch the data. I'm going to analyze the data over the course of the next year, have some blogs out there that will follow and correlate, my training kind of styles and my training struggles, if you will, and the same struggles and the opportunities that we have with data and litigation.
Well, I'm looking for an app that will track how much crawfish I'm going to eat this year. We're coming at just the very, very tip of the early crawfish season now, and my friend Shaggy, the crawfish king of New Orleans, who runs a crawfish festival every year between the weekends of Jazz Fest, actually has a crawfish eating contest. So I think I should. My challenge will be to challenge Dan Regard to see who can eat the most crawfish in 2019.
Well, so here's what I'll do for you. You track how many crawfish you eat, and I will run 1 mile for every crawfish.
Oh, you don't want to do that.
Maybe data, so you got to find your app.
Maybe 1 mile for every pound of crawfish. That might be a little. Yeah, that might be a little easier to accomplish. If it's per crawfish, you're going to be in the thousands, my friend.
Okay, maybe we'll go with every pound.
Well, listen, thanks so much. This is fascinating. We had talked about this, and I was looking for a little bit more of a deep dive into how you're doing it and what you're trying to do here. I love the approach. I love the data-centric approach, especially with the huge volume of data that we are getting. It only seems to be increasing. I think this is great. I'd encourage anybody who has more questions, of course, to just contact you directly. Your information's there on the screen. Will we see you at Legal Tech in New York next year?
You know, every year I say I'm not going, and every year I end up going. So this year, though, in the spirit of training, I believe I'm going to be hosting a nice little run through Central Park. If it's raining, snowing, or whatever, we're going to do it.
Okay. Who is it?
And you'll be sitting at the finish line with hot cocoa, right, and coffee.
I'll be sitting at the Carnegie Club, which is a block away from the hotel, and is a wonderful cigar lounge. Since it will be, of course, in winter, I will be indoors and partaking in a fine cigar. So I will think of you crossing the finish line, but it is highly unlikely I will be out there in the cold actually watching you finish. I'll suggest that Ari Kaplan, my friend Ari, who is also a runner, I'll send him as my surrogate. I'll give him
there we go.
He has my proxy to run for me. How's that?
As long as you're not putting your Fitbit or something like that on him and then making us have to analyze who was who.
Trust me, I have no Fitbit. You will never see a Fitbit on my wrist, my friend.
Oh, too funny. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks again. I look forward to seeing you in New York, though. I'm like you. I always say I'm not going to go, and then somehow I end up being there for a couple of days. I will look forward to seeing you if I don't talk to you between now and then. Have a great holiday season. Please give my regards to Dan as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you. And that's all we have for today from the eDiscovery channel. Craig Ball and I will probably be filming something, a little holiday message for everyone, which will potentially involve him singing and my laughing in the background while he's singing. So you can probably look for that sometime between now and Christmas time. Until then, we'll say goodbye from the eDiscovery channel.